but we will go ahead and get started in the interest of time. So thank you again for joining in to learn more about getting started with the Building Blocks Framework. This will be a 4-part virtual series, and we're so excited to really jump in today and do an overview of the framework. So I am Carrie Kennengeiser. I am the Program Director for South Carolina Partnerships for Inclusion, also known as SCIPI, and I'm joined today by...
Hi, I am Dr. Kate Aceta. I'm an assistant professor at the University of South Carolina. It's great to see all you folks. Just before you jumped on here, I promise I'm going to stop talking, but Carrie knows how passionate and perhaps oddly passionate I am about the Building Blocks Framework. And so when she asked if I wanted to collaborate with her on this, I couldn't be more thrilled. I absolutely love the Building Blocks Framework. So I'm excited that other folks are so interested in learning more about this. So hello all.
Thanks, Kate. So just a couple of housekeeping items. This session is being recorded, as will the others in the series. For anyone that's not able to join us live, you should all be muted. Please keep yourselves muted. And again, use that chat box for any questions you might have and any areas of discussion you might have to contribute with. We will have some time at the end for additional questions, and this again is an overview, and the sessions that follow will be diving deeper into each piece of the building blocks. So I would like to know a little bit about the participants that we have with us today. So I'm about to launch a poll. And if you could kindly just fill that out and let us know who we have in our session today. And if you're not represented and you click other, please feel free to use the chat box to let us know what your role is. Looks like we have a lot of special education teachers joining in. Welcome, everyone. All right, take another 10 seconds if you haven't completed that. And so it looks like we have a good group. We have a lot of folks represented here today. So we are interested in just your input and the lens that you're coming to this training with. And we hope that it is valuable for you. And Kate, if you could help me just make sure I'm looking in the chat too, so I'm not missing anything that I shouldn't be missing.
I'm on it. I've got eyes on the chat.
Thanks. So during this hour, we will define preschool inclusion. We'll distinguish the Building Blocks Framework from a curriculum. We'll describe the 4 components of the framework, and we'll begin exploring the steps for planning and implementing the Building Blocks Framework. So right now on this Monday afternoon, you might be thinking a few things. Maybe you're thinking, oh my goodness, Carrie, inclusion is overwhelming. Where do I even start? I'm just not sure about all of this. Or maybe you're thinking, early childhood inclusion sounds kind of complicated, but I'm definitely curious and I want to learn more about high quality inclusive early childhood programming and what I can do in my classroom. Perhaps you have some knowledge regarding preschool inclusion. Maybe you've worked in inclusive settings, or you've already implemented some evidence-based practices to support all of your students. You're really ready for inclusive practices, but you're looking for some more support to move forward, really to kind of put all of the pieces together for your plan. Or maybe you're kind of wondering when I'll get to the content of this. You're super pumped, you're knowledgeable, and you really have a lot to share. You feel ready for early childhood inclusion. So I'd like to do a temperature check. And wherever you feel today, that's okay. I'm going to acknowledge that including children with disabilities, including children with a variety of abilities can feel overwhelming and it can feel complicated. And there's not a one size fits all model or strategy. However, there is much research in this area and many evidence-based practices and strategies to support successful inclusion of young children with disabilities. So we'll discuss a lot of this in this 4-part series. So before I get started, I'm going to launch another poll to do a quick temperature check and see how you're all feeling in this moment. Looks like most people have completed it. Just take another 10 seconds or so. Well, I love these results. No one is completely unsure or uncomfortable. Everyone here today knows something and is bringing something to the table and wants to learn more. So I think this is a really great place to be in. And wherever you kind of landed on that, I know that you will be able to add more tools to your toolbox after this series that Dr. Seta and I are presenting. So just to backtrack a little bit, because I realize I skipped over it, here's the overview of the series. We're starting today to just give you just kind of a quick getting started overview of the framework, and then we will have some deep dives that really go further into each block in the framework. So speaking of the building blocks framework, well, what is this? It's not a curriculum. And instead, it provides a framework. We're really big about frameworks, I feel like, in the early childhood world. And Dr. Seta is nodding her head. But a framework for addressing individual needs of young children in inclusive preschool settings. And if you follow Skippy, you know that's what we're all about. So therefore, you can use this with any high quality early childhood curricula. Maybe you're using the creative curriculum. Maybe you're using HighScope, maybe Project Approach, or maybe something else, but you can use that within the building blocks framework. In addition, this can be used to improve children's functional outcomes in relation to federal requirements in early childhood special ed. So even though this framework was developed with young children with disabilities in mind, it provides an approach and practical strategies that every teacher can use to be effective to help all children, regardless of disability status, to participate and learn in their preschool setting. And isn't that what we want for everybody?
I just have a little something I wanted to add there. Carrie knows I use the building blocks framework as the core of my methods course that all early childhood special educators at the University of South Carolina take. That's how much I believe that they are sort of, and look, I don't get paid by Ava Horn and Susan Sandel. I do think they do some really phenomenal work related to this content. And what I think is really sort of succinct about this, and as we go, as you stay with us through the next 3 weeks, and we go through those different pieces or components of this framework, is understanding and sort of highlighting the real world strategies that you can implement daily into your classrooms, or you can coach someone into using in their classrooms. I think it really provides a lot of versatility. And as an out and proud constructivist, I think, who didn't have a curricula that was purchased by any early childhood program that I've worked in, except when I worked in Head Start for a little while. It's nice to know that you can really have child-centered approaches where you're thinking about embedding learning opportunities for young children into the daily classroom routine. So just wanted to say that.
Thanks, Kate. So before we really dive into the content, we'd like for you to reflect on these 2 questions. First, what does inclusion actually mean? It's a big buzzword, and a lot of people can have a lot of different views on what this actually is. And then what does it mean for a young child to be successful in an early childhood classroom? So take a moment to think about that and jot your ideas down in the chat box for us, please. What comes to mind when I say inclusion? And what comes to mind when we're talking about success for little kids? And I see some things coming in. Thank you, Blanche. All children, right? Inclusion means all. Supporting all children in the classroom, regardless of their abilities or development, including in all activities without limits. I love what I'm seeing in the chat. Equal access, meaningful, right? Thinking about meaningful participation, meaningful activities. Right, Kelly said, thinking about your special education teacher and your general education teacher. How can we collaborate? How can we make sure we're not doing things in silos? Erin, I love that. All children have the chance to learn, to play, to grow. Because early childhood is a lot about play, and we want everyone to be able to play together and everyone to be able to make a friend. Thank you, Elizabeth, right? Everyone's given the same opportunities, right? So many good things. I can't even catch up with all of it. Yeah, safe environment. Sorry, go ahead, Kate.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. A safe, nurturing environment. Yeah, absolutely.
And we'll talk a little bit about this, because in order to do this well, we're going to focus on what does it mean to be a high quality early childhood program, because we can't talk about using inclusive practices and how do we build on that unless we know what we have at our foundation. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much. And you can continue to reflect. Don't let me stop you. But we're going to talk a little bit more about what inclusion means and what it really means to be successful if I'm a little kiddo. So first, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, we know that this is grounded in our laws, right? Least restrictive environment, or LRE, is a legal requirement, and it applies to our preschool students too. It's not just for K-12. Our 3 through 5-year-olds, this is a law for them as well. We know that the first placement, the first option that we consider for a child with a disability who is eligible for special education services is their regular general education preschool program. And then we see, okay, do they need some supplemental services, supports within that environment? We have far too many little kids that are receiving their services in self-contained, segregated settings. So we need to think about what is it that we need to do to prevent that from happening and ensure that we're on the right track and doing right by our littlest students. So what do we mean by early childhood inclusion? To make sure we're all singing from the same song page and we have a shared definition. The one that we love to use comes out of a joint position statement by the Division for Early Childhood, or DEC, out of the Council for Exceptional Children and the National Association for the Education of Young Children. So it highlights 3 key principles that are used to really identify these high quality early childhood inclusive settings, and those are access, participation, and supports. And access really relates to providing access to a wide range of learning opportunities, activities, settings, and environments. Participation is when we talk about meaningful participation. Just because I have access to a setting, what is happening when I'm in that setting? Am I able to fully engage in the learning activities and the play with my peers? What supports are there for me to meaningfully participate in that? And supports really speaks to the infrastructure. What types of supports are in place to make sure that we can actually do this? Professional development, shared training, scheduling, opportunities for communication and collaboration, and thinking about how early childhood takes place across many sectors. So how are we all working together to support our littlest students? Or simply put, human beings treating other human beings like human beings. And this is not my words. They're not my words, but I love them. This is from Aaron Hall, who is the Director of Programs for the National Inclusion Project. So inclusion is really about belonging and participating in a diverse society. Children should have a sense of belonging. There should be genuine child learning, and there should be opportunities to build friendships. I think we would all agree that everyone can make a friend, everyone can participate, and everyone can be successful. What are the supports we're going to put in place to make that happen? And why? Again, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, but we know from a lot of research that preschool inclusion improves kindergarten readiness and later school success and really creates a trajectory for inclusion across the life course. And on the flip side, those students who start preschool in segregated self-contained settings are more likely to remain in those segregated settings. We know that kids with disabilities, including those with the most significant disabilities and the highest needs, can make significant development and learning progress in inclusive settings. And we know that this benefits both kids with and without disabilities. So we are focusing on an inclusive environment. And I really love this quote. If you've attended any of our trainings, you've probably seen this. Through my work with schools and early learning programs, I often hear really well-intentioned grown-ups say things like, oh man, but Kate's not ready for that class. So I challenge you, I challenge anyone that says this, what does that actually mean? What does it take to be ready to be around other 3-year-olds or other 4-year-olds? The primary goal of early childhood inclusion or early childhood programs in general is just helping young children to be prepared for kindergarten. How am I prepared for kindergarten? Well, learning social skills, identifying emotions, working on self-regulation skills. All 3, 4, 5-year-olds not yet in kindergarten are working on this, right? So how are we helping young children with disabilities? By isolating and segregating them and not providing access to their peers and the general education curriculum. We're kind of setting them up for failure, right? So it's imperative that we flip this thinking. What can we as the adults, the programs, do to prepare to meet the needs of all children? And again, we know from years and years of research that kids with disabilities can be educated within regular early childhood programs. We're going to provide some specialized instruction. We're going to be intentional and use embedded opportunities for learning, which we'll talk more about. And we know that this is more successful when there is time for effective collaboration and teaming. Make sure there's no questions in the chat. Okay. Thanks, Kate, for sharing all of those links. Appreciate it. So I will kind of get down off my soapbox, but not really that much. And let's talk about the building blocks framework, because that's why you're here, right? So again, building blocks is a multi-tiered framework for considering how to include young children with disabilities in general early care and education settings. We use the building blocks model to help all children participate, learn, and thrive in any classroom. So this framework really provides teachers with a variety of methods and strategies to ensure that all kiddos can learn those important skills in their early learning environment, right, wherever they're going to school. And the practices, like I mentioned, they're not curriculum, but they can be used to supplement the curriculum that you're already using, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And as you see on the screen, there are 4 key components to the building blocks framework. And each tier includes a higher degree of intensity. So at the foundation there, you'll see a high quality early childhood program like we talked about. That's huge. That's important for all children. Then the remaining blocks, curriculum modifications and adaptations, embedded learning opportunities, and explicit child-focused instructional strategies represent educational practices that might be appropriate for some children for some of their learning objectives. So again, at the foundation of all of this, we know high quality learning environment is important for all kids. And there's a number of large national studies that demonstrate that high quality early learning programs result in better outcomes for children, right? Both immediately and in the long term. So the successful inclusion of young children is really based on the assumption that the early childhood settings are already high quality places where children are provided with warm and responsive teaching and where their developmental needs are met, where their strengths, their needs, and their interests, as well as social and cultural contexts, are also considered. So the first step in using the building blocks is to assess the current level of your classroom quality and to find out to what extent the basic features of a high quality early childhood program are in place. So what might that include? What do you think? What are some practices or elements that are found in typically or in developing appropriate learning environments? When you think of developmentally appropriate practices or developmentally appropriate learning environments, what are some things that you're like, yep, we have to have this in place? You can feel free to share with us in the chat. Yeah, I see play. Absolutely, Tanya. Little kids learn by play. Safe and child-friendly. Yes. Like Dr. Osetta and I both pointed out before, like those key pieces. Language use. Yes, Lucy. Right, Angie, right? We're being intentional with our opportunities for play, and we're letting kids play, but we're really observing and we're interacting with children while they play. Any other thoughts? Yes, age appropriate. And I think sometimes we forget that, right? Thanks, Sherry. Thinking about our materials too and our activities.
Yeah. Those materials, books, toys, those kinds of things. What are they going to be able to access?
I think y'all are doing an excellent job, right? Engaging interactions, responsive and predictable environments. We know all about schedules and routines, right? Making sure kids are not surprised by what's coming next. Providing lots of opportunities to learn, lots of opportunities for practice. Making sure your teaching is matched to the kiddo and the activity. This was one that everyone said, right? Thinking about all of our materials, activities, and interactions. Are they developmentally appropriate for a 3, 4, 5-year-old? Safe and hygienic practices. And appropriate levels of child guidance. So thinking about kind of having that balance of teacher-directed activities and child-initiated activities and making sure it's appropriate. Any other thoughts in the chat that I missed? Hands-on, yeah. Thank you everyone for participating. Anything else you wanted to add, Kate?
Well, I could go on and on about play and materials, but we are going to talk more about that in a little bit. But I think really thinking about sort of accessibility in the sense of like, what are materials that would allow children to be able to engage both independently and really think about this from like a scaffolded perspective of thinking about to have a sort of a balance of those things. But we're going to talk about that in this one a little bit more, and then in the future when we think about teacher versus child directed activities. But yeah.
Thanks.
And this is, sorry, I said I was done, but I'm not. I think this is the hardest part. I actually think that the bottom tier is the hardest part for folks because it requires self-reflection and acknowledging our role in, as I think it was Tanya said, hi Tanya, by the way, in the, that the environment is the third teacher, but also the teacher's role in setting up that learning environment. And when that great quote you had earlier about, is the child ready versus the program should be ready? I think that's the key here, is being able to acknowledge, are our programs ready? Do the adults have the support that they need in order to make sure that learning is going to occur for all young children that walk in that door? And I think that's the hard part, that self-reflection, the self-evaluation that we're going to talk about in a few minutes as we get started in thinking about the building blocks framework.
Thanks, Kate. So if we move up, if we've reflected on our high quality early childhood program, then the next piece of the building blocks are curriculum modifications and adaptations. So a curriculum modification is a change to the ongoing classroom activity or materials to really either achieve or maximize a child's participation. So teachers and other members of the team can make modifications, they can make adaptations, and they can make accommodations to classroom activities, routines, and learning areas to include children with disabilities in the classroom to really enhance their participation. So by increasing the child's participation in the learning environment, the child then can take advantage of the learning opportunities being presented. And when we do a deep dive on this next week, we'll talk about the 8 different types of curriculum modifications and how you can use them. But quickly, this might look like maybe Timmy takes a picture or a toy with him to recall something that he has to talk about. Or maybe Ladrika has a large block placed under her feet when she's sitting at a table, just to help her sit with better stability. But again, we will take a whole hour next week to really dive into the curriculum modifications piece. The next piece of the framework are embedded learning opportunities, or ELOs for short. And you might have heard of these with kind of another word. There's lots of other kind of words that are tossed around for this, but really teachers can increase or enhance children's learning by embedding or integrating planned opportunities within your typical usual classroom activities and routines. So teachers identify opportunities that are related to an individual objective and really take advantage of a child's interests by embedding these short, systematic, and instructional interactions. So really you're thinking about what to teach, when to teach it, and how to teach it. And again, we'll go into much greater depth in 2 weeks talking about ELOs. But this might look like Timmy is working on sorting by size in the housekeeping area with some of the dishes there, or maybe at the block area with the building toys. And that's been planned and it's intentional, and you're going to collect data on that. Or maybe Ladrika gets planned practice at asking questions during arrival and snack times, because you know that communication and asking and having kind of that back and forth are one of her goals. And there's actually been a great deal of research that has demonstrated the effectiveness of embedded learning opportunities in really teaching a variety of skills to young children. And one of the added bonuses are that kids not only acquire that target skill, but then they demonstrate generalized knowledge of those skills. And then at the top of our framework are, it's a mouthful, child-focused instructional strategies, or CFIS. And sometimes, and you probably have seen this, there more explicit instruction might be needed than is given throughout, curriculum modifications or those embedded learning opportunities. So by using child-focused instructional strategies, teachers can identify learning opportunities that are matched to a child's individual objectives and provide planned, consistent, systematic instruction to each specific skill, behavior, or concept. And these skills may be ones that the child is not able to learn from the usual curriculum, even with modifications or embedded learning opportunities. So this might look like Timmy receives some special instruction during toileting time in which he works on unfastening and fastening the buttons on his clothing. Or maybe Ladrika works on taking turns in conversation with peers at her small group table. And her teacher uses a systematic prompting strategy to increase the number and complexity of her turns. And of all the blocks in this framework, these child-focused instructional strategies really has the most robust research support. And again, we'll do a deeper dive in a few weeks on this. Anything else to add or any questions on this?
Just a quick add. I think Carrie did such a lovely job describing the building blocks and really thinking about the evidence at each sort of block level, if you will. And it can sometimes, I think, feel overwhelming to think about how we would embark on doing this daily. We have so many other things that we're thinking about as classroom teachers, and what would this actually look like? Have no fear. That's what Carrie and I are here for, which is to support you in thinking about ways to do this. And also, if you think about it, curriculum modifications and adaptations, they're going to be the most frequently used. A lot of child goals or needs can be specifically addressed by simple modification. I think about all the time about just like, if you were to, wrap something around like a piece of styrofoam around a pen or a marker. So for a child that's working on a palmar grasp or a pincer grasp, you would really be able to do, that's so simple. It's like really sort of simple, not very complicated. And then they get more specific, but it also means you're doing them less often. So not every child is going to have specific goals that are going to require child-focused instructional strategies. We're going to think about the matching the goal and sort of where they are in the type of teaching need that sort of is going to match best for that particular child at that particular time.
Yeah. Thanks, Kate. And with that, we'll talk a little bit about, okay, you want to do the building blocks framework. How do you get started? What do you do?
All right, I think this is me, right? Yes, this is where I'm supposed to do lots of talking. Okay, great. So getting started, you're in. We saw from the poll that more than 50% of you're in for inclusion. The big stumbling block often is, what do we actually do? So we're committed, but is our program ready? So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to assess the quality of the classroom. The really important thing to remember is this is not about right or wrong, good things or bad things. It's really a litmus test. Like, where are we? Sort of just like Carrie did, taking the temperature. So sort of where are we? And then thinking about what are the pieces that we can enhance as we move forward. And there's lots of really great inclusionary measures out there and assessment tools. We're going to focus on something that's specifically utilized in the building blocks, and we'll get to that in a minute. But we have this sort of 6 sequence steps. So you're going to assess the quality of the classroom. Then you're going to plan that classroom schedule. I'm guessing you've already done that. But we're going to think a lot about that classroom schedule and what it looks like, and a balance between, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes too as well. Then we're going to plan for an individual child, whether it's Timmy or Ladrika, Garrett or Brent, whoever it happens to be. We're going to be thinking about those individual children. Then we're going to clarify and check back in. Why? Well, is it working? We don't want to keep doing something that's not working. So we got to sort of check back in and see where we're going with things. And not just, I say we as in like the adults. Are we doing the things we said we were going to do? Not is the child doing the things we said they were going to do. That's great, but this is a 50-50 here. We need to make sure that we're showing up in the classrooms and we're doing the things that we said we were going to do when we wrote them down on that piece of paper. It's great to write it down on a paper, but it doesn't do us a whole lot of good if we don't actually do those things consistently. So we got to implement, we got to check back in with ourselves and also with the child to see where things are going. We're going to construct an activity matrix. You don't know what that is, but you probably already do. You may already do something like this. I know when I was a Head Start teacher and director, we had something very similar about without using the building blocks, where we were looking about when we were going to focus on individual children's goals throughout the day. When was that actually going to happen? That's what an activity matrix sort of simply put is. And then we're going to implement and evaluate. We're going to check back in. Where are we? What's our progress? Are we implementing to fidelity? Are we doing what we said we were going to do? Because if we're not, we're probably not going to see those changes that we'd hope to see and the improvement in child's skills that we were aiming for. So it's always important to sort of do that self-reflection piece as well. Did I show up and do the thing I said I was going to do? Yeah, this is my nod. Oh, can I move? I don't know. Can I move them forward? No, I think that's just you. Okay. Feel free to ask questions in the chat. I'm taking a look at that as well. So we're assessing the classroom. There's tiny words on the screen, but know that they're bigger if you buy the book. Look, I don't make any money, so it's not like if you buy the book, I get there it is. Carrie knows, and anybody who's seen me present before, any or talk even in a meeting, Erin Martin, I'm looking at you. I regularly have this book just like at the ready, but I don't actually have my copies here. But you can see the larger images there. And I don't know, I think we probably can't share them because I think like we'll get sued or something, but because we're not Susan Sandal. So, but we can talk more about the book that this is coming from, which is the Building Blocks book. So sort of the key things we want to think about when we're looking at the quality classroom assessment form. What you'll note is these are really simple. This is not complicated. This should not take long. This is something that you do in the beginning of your school year as you're getting ready to set up your classroom, right? We want to think, or maybe you're saying, oh, it's the end of the year, like it's March now and we're getting this. It's never too late to check in. It's never too late to assess the classroom and sort of see where you are. It's never too late to make changes. Oh, can you go back? Sorry.
Sorry.
Beautiful. There we go. Oh, no, that's okay. Beautiful. So some of the sort of broader questions are, we want to think about classroom wide. Does it provide an environment that's interesting and engaging? And that often means, if you're familiar with the Eckers, as I see Nikki is and other folks, we want to make sure there's not too much stimulation on the walls, right? We want to make sure that we're sort of balancing that out there. Do we provide the information that kids need in order to be able to engage in the classroom and feel connected? Do we see photos of families and things of that nature? Or is it just like a ton of bright colors like all over the wall? And that's really overstimulating. So we've got those things. Does the classroom offer a balance of activities? So this is small and whole group. Do we give kids opportunities to engage with 2 to 3 other children, maybe 4 other kids and a grown-up, versus whole group? And how long are those whole groups? Thinking about those kinds of things. Do you have a balance? Gross motor versus fine motor. You know, if you teach birth to 5-year-olds, you can never have enough gross motor activities. I say that as a parent of a 2-year-old. They can't move enough. So we want to think about that balance between those things. And remembering that 3 to 5-year-olds and really birth to 5-year-olds need a lot of gross motor movement. A lot of sitting for a long period with those fine motor makes it very difficult for young children to be able to attend for long periods of time. Does the classroom offer emotional and physical security? Is there a cozy spot? Are there pictures of their family members? Do they feel connected? Those kinds of things. And the list goes on and on. I'm trying to like zoom in a little bit, but I don't really need to do that. There's lots of other things and we can sort of talk more about those. And it looks like Ginny posted the link to the book here from Brooks Publishing. And you can always, reach out to Carrie and I to talk more about the specific book and things of that nature. Okay, let's move on. Oh my, it's already 3:40. Okay. Oh, I already said this. Look at this. I'm so good. So it's almost as if I knew my slides in advance. So we want to think about planning the schedule, right? So it's all about balance, like I've been saying. You want to think about that small versus whole group versus individual time. That's so key. Do kids have opportunities to engage individually, just like on their own, giving them that opportunity to practice and flex and build up that skill of solitary play or peer play, but without having a lot of teacher directed. Outdoor time, are they getting opportunities to move and explore their bodies and their learning environment? This doesn't need to be in the wild woods. While that is fabulous, a good old-fashioned playground will do just as well. And it doesn't even need to be huge. So anything will do if they can, as long as they can get outside. Teacher-directed versus child-directed. Sometimes we think when we hear, oh, we're going to include young children with disabilities, particularly, I'm talking to you special educators as one of them, we tend to get very focused on teacher-directed, right? We want to make sure that kids are going to get that direct instruction. That's often because we're nervous. We want to think about planning our schedule so that we have those child-directed versus teacher-directed, and there's a balance and an ebb and a flow. Also, let's be honest, if you have a lot of teacher-directed, I don't know how you're going to be able to be one-on-one with all those kids. You need to be able to make sure you have a balance of where you can have scaffolded activities and small groups so kids can really be independent in those kinds of learning opportunities. And is there enough time to transition? Transition is learning. So much can happen during those transition times. So we want to make sure that one, we don't have too many transitions, but also just enough, and that we provide time for transition. Nothing moves slower than a toddler who knows you need to go somewhere. So we need to make sure that we give the breadth and the time for kids to be able to move from point A to point B and embed learning within those opportunities. Okay, I feel good about that. Oh, Carrie, am I missing anything? You want to just feel like jump in?
You're doing great. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, planning and clarifying. Okay, so now we've thought about the classroom. Okay, we've done our little check boxes. Yes, no, I'm kind of not sure. Big picture. Now we're looking at the schedule and we're saying to ourselves, all right, are we there enough? Is circle time 45 minutes? Too long. Ugh, get rid of that. So you really want to think about that. You can always make the cycle longer, leave them sign in more. You know what I mean? We want them more circle. That's what we always want, is our kids to request more for that, but let them decide how long it should be. So then we say we're going to plan and clarify. So we want to think about the individual kids. Maybe in your classroom, you've got 7 kids with IEPs or IFSPs, or maybe you've got a whole kit and caboodle or the whole class. But we're hoping this is going to be an inclusion setting. So this means we're going to sort of be polka dotted through with young learners who are going to need all different kinds of supports. And you might say to yourself, Dr. Aceta, do I have to pick a child who has an IEP? Absolutely not. All children are going to need some kind of modification, some kind of support. Everybody has developmental variations. Some people need more targeted support than others, but everybody benefits from the grownups in their lives thinking, where are they developmentally and how can I set up a learning environment that's going to support their next steps? But for our intents and purposes, we're thinking specifically here about kids with IEPs or IFSPs, but really all children benefit from thinking about where they are developmentally and then planning a classroom that meets their needs. So what are their strengths? I hate that we lead with needs here. Let's talk about their strengths. What are the things that the child's really doing really well? And then use those as your sort of jumping off point to enhance the other areas. What are the sort of next developmental goals or steps? Maybe you're looking at the ASQ, the APS. You're going to think about sort of where are they developmentally? Maybe if this was 10 years ago, you'd be using Galileo, but nobody uses that anymore. That was like a little joke out there for those of you who remember Galileo. Or maybe you use TS Gold, whatever your sort of looking at your sort of developmental steps are. You're going to look and sort of see where this child is next, and then you're going to plan. It's all about assessment and who is involved. So it might not just be you, the lead classroom teacher, or maybe you sitting here. I saw there was a speech pathologist in there. There was a program director. How are the other adults going to be involved in the planning and then the clarifying of how we're going to really be able to provide those supports? And this is where we're going to start to later on. We're going to think about what are their needs? What are those next steps? And then we're going to think about, is that a curriculum modification? Is it an embedded learning opportunity? Or is it a CFIS? Sort of depending on the child and depending on sort of their sort of current developmental needs and levels. Okay, let's keep going because I feel like we got more. Do you also look surprised? I feel like I look just as surprised as you what the slide's going to be. I'm not. I obviously knew exactly what was going to be on this. So we've got our construct activity. Gary's never going to want to present with me again. So we're doing our construct activity matrix right here. And you may be looking at this, you're getting close to the screen and you're saying, I feel like I've seen this before. You may have. And as I mentioned, you may actually use something very similar to this in your current program or classroom setting. And it really gives you an opportunity. You'll see up at the top there, my arrow's on it, but you can't see it. That's okay. It says identify 5 colors. You're going to think about the goals right there. This is for Tyler here. And we're going to see Tyler's goals right up at the top. And then on the column on the side, we went ahead. There we go. The column on the side, we've got arrival. So our daily schedule, right? And so we're going to think about what's Tyler working on and when might we work on it with him? And you'll see that there's little CMs, ELOs, CFISs, all sort of like, actually, he doesn't have any CFIS. He has all ELOs and CMs right there. And you're going to think about this plan schedule, the number of kids, their particular goals, and how they're related to specific activities. This is really just super planned instruction. This is best practice right here. This is what we should be doing, whether you have a class full of kids with IEPs or IFSPs, or you've got a class with no kids with IEPs and IFSPs. This is best practice. You should be thinking about the developmental needs of your kids and where they are in their next sequence. So really just thinking about how are we going to target these kids' specific goals, and when might we do that throughout the day? And then the number of adults, so how to best utilize staff. It goes back to my point when we think about small versus whole group. And when you're doing those small groups, are you planning small groups that you really need an adult at for every single group? Spoiler alert, it's going to fail. You are going to need to make sure that you have scaffolded learning opportunities that kids can do independently, and that you can sort of balance it out and sort of work on those kinds of goals. Oh, I wrote that right there. I should really look at the slides more. So we really want to think about sort of how we can sort of balance this all throughout the day. Oh, let's advance. 348. Okay. How's it going? We got to implement and evaluate. Remember in the getting started with the little footprints, we had to assess the quality of the classroom, plan the schedule, plan for an individual child. We're going to check back and clarify. We're going to construct an activity matrix. We're in our final step. Not really, because it's kind of an iterative process. You're going to come back around. And we're going to implement and evaluate. How is it going? How's it going for you? How's it going for Garrett? How's it going for Pablo? How's it going for everybody? We want to check in and make sure and see how's it going. And how do we know? My favorite word, data. You got to collect some data. Doesn't need to be fancy. It doesn't need to be on an Excel sheet. It could be straight up on a tally mark on, like I used to do when I was a classroom teacher, and the number of Post-it notes that I had all over the room, and little clipboards with Post-it notes sort of focused on individuals. How frequently did this particular behavior occur? Doesn't need to be fancy and doesn't need to be expensive. Well, we got to collect some data, right? Because anecdotally, sometimes in the day-to-day, it feels like we're just not making any progress. It's just not getting any better. But when we actually take a look at the data, he did 3 more than he did the day before. Bingo, bango, that's very exciting. Or the tantrums reduced, or whatever it happens to be. Ladrika requested help during snack time and asked for a spoon. And normally she sort of just sits there. And now she's been able to request. That's exciting. And we need to be able to sort of articulate that and capture that with numbers. Also, those of you classroom teachers who are saying, I need more assistance, or I could really use this help. When you collect that data, you can share it back with your program directors to be able to say, these are the things that we're doing and it's really working. Or we might need additional supports while these particular children are learning to master these particular skills. So data, data, data. And then make the necessary changes based on your data. You gather this information, again, not just on the child, but did you do the things, and this will make more sense in particular when we get to the ELOs and the embedded learning opportunities, but even a curriculum modification. If we are supposed to use a visual schedule, and you don't use it, it's real hard for the child to become more independent and understand the routine. So we got to make sure that we're checking in with ourselves as well as what's happening with the kids in our class. Are we doing the kinds of things that we said we were going to do and showing up for them the way we hope that they'll show up for us every day? So we got to make sure that we're doing those kinds of things. And then we kind of check back in again. There's no hard and fast rule. You don't have to assess the quality of the classroom again, but I would say it's great to check in every 3 to 4 months. I don't have data to support that. This is just sort of anecdotally. Check in every couple months with yourself and just walk through your own classroom at the end of the day and say to yourself, like, where are we? Like, have we drifted from where we said we wanted to be? And then sort of just allow yourself to gently reframe and sort of come back to center as you can. And you'll sort of check back in because kids are going to change. You're going to change. You're going to get that kid that shows up in February, surprise, and you're going to maybe need to make some different kinds of changes as you move forward with that. Okay. I think this is you.
Yeah, well, it's anybody. What questions do you have? And keep in mind that we will, again, do a deeper dive next week on curriculum modifications, the following week on embedded learning opportunities, and the last week in the series on the child-focused instructional strategies. And thinking particularly if there are pieces that you're like, yeah, this sounds great. Can you make sure you explicitly tell us how to do X, or we want to know more about Y, in the following sessions. Ooh, Kate, look at this question. It's a good one. How does this align, or does it, with the pyramid model?
Oh, great. Was that your way of asking me to respond?
Well, I just thought it was a great question, but
I do love that.
if you have a response, go for it.
I have some thoughts. Do you have thoughts, Carrie?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I think it aligns really, really well. So if you think back to the pyramid model, that sort of bottom, the bottom tier, even that sort of pre-tier, if you will, which is the high quality staff, and then we want to have those warm, responsive caregivers and relationships. We want to make sure that that comes in first, right? We want to make sure that we have that strong foundation, the same way here that you would want a strong foundation in a high quality inclusive classroom. Many of the practices that we're going to highlight here, you will see are instructional strategies. So they're teaching practices or teaching strategies. And I don't mean like Tucker Turtle kind of instructional strategies, for those of you familiar with the pyramid model, but embedded learning opportunities, wait time, a prompting hierarchy, those kinds of things that you would use to teach a variety of skills, you would find here. So I think it aligns beautifully. And I think you can, in my professional opinion, you can never have too many frameworks when you think of, and I mean that sincerely, when you think of frameworks as organizational holding containers for strategies and practices. That's what they are. They're just Tupperware that you use for instructional strategies. Is they sort of provide a sort of guidance around, here's a way to think about how to build on those kinds of practices that lead to improved and positive outcomes for young children and families. Carrie?
You did. Thanks, Kate. Yeah, no, I think it aligns really well. So I think you shared that nicely. Elizabeth, you asked about, what about kids who haven't been screened or they don't have an IEP? Well, like Kate said, we can use this framework for anyone. So if we know, ooh, Kate doesn't seem to be learning from just this curriculum and this really high quality environment and all of these pieces I already have, well, maybe Kate needs a curriculum modification. Let's try that for Kate. Let's think about what it is she's doing really well. What are her strengths? What are her interests? What is she struggling with? And then we're going to learn about all these curriculum modifications and what might I be able to do to support Kate so that she is able to be engaged and participate in whatever this activity is. And then let me collect some data on that and let me see, is this working? Does she need something more? So I think regardless of whether a child has an identified disability or has an IEP, we can still use this framework to support all the kiddos that we work with.
Yeah, absolutely. I could say more, but I think Carrie got it.
Lisa, I'm really glad that you are enjoying this presentation. I'm not sure if you raised your hand before. Somebody raised their hand and I apologize, y'all. I'm bad with trying to figure out who that was and how to find who that was. Let me see. If I look at the participants list, maybe I can do that.
While you're looking that up, in response to clarify, Nikki, your comment about class, I'm assuming you're referring to the observational tool class. Yeah. I mean, I think, if anybody out there in the Head Start world, you often are using building blocks, pyramid model, and you're having your annual class observations, right? So it's just more data to give you a sense of sort of what's happening in the classroom or at the classroom level. I think that you could use that to think about it, but class doesn't do one of their sort of gaps in there is in inclusive practices. So while they do highlight aspects of sort of best practice when we think about the classroom environment, there are more specific strategies or components that we would be thinking about when we're thinking about the design of an inclusive classroom. I don't know if that answered your question or your comment there. Yeah, and the teapot does a really beautiful job of honing in specifically on those pyramid model practices that were mentioned before about sort of how does that fit into the framework. So absolutely, you know, thinking about there's lots of different sort of measures and observational tools that we can use depending on what our aim is when we're thinking about sort of overall classroom quality. We can use something really, as I hate to say simple, I don't mean to be dismissive of the work done in here, but their quality assessment indicators that they have in here are very, very simple. I think there's 7 of them, maybe 8. So they're pretty, I don't want to use the word simple again, but clear. They highlight all the big things that you'd be thinking about in a classroom and a high quality learning environment for young children, for all young children.
And I figured it out. So it's Jeanette had her hand raised. So Jeanette, if there's something that you wanted to ask us, you can feel free to put that in the chat. I see that there's 2 minutes left. So I want to make sure if you did have a question or a comment that you can get that in the chat box and we can address it for you. And then just thinking about time, please use those 2 minutes if you have any other thoughts. But so you know, if you do have questions, you can feel free to email. You can use the skippy@mailbox.sc.edu email on the screen. And if it's a particular question that it's for Kate, I can make sure it gets to her as well. This is our website. If you're looking for more information, I would say to subscribe to the newsletter because you'll get updates on things that we have going on. And I will also put a quick evaluation poll on the screen. And there's not a lot you can tell us here. It's just like a Likert scale, but if you have additional feedback, questions or comments, you can feel free to email us. I see that Dr. Seta put her email in the chat. You can email the Skippy email, you can email Kate and just let us know, hey, we had a question about this, or we hope you do this, or tell us more about this. But we really do appreciate your time this afternoon, and we're looking forward to seeing all of you in the weeks to come to really dive deeper into these strategies.